we in our modern age of enlightenment look at astrology as being superstitious and as being something to play with and to look at horoscopes in the newspapers. But really, for most of human civilization, extrapolating conclusions from the alignment of the stars was a full-time job and actually quite a dominant preoccupation among almost all levels of society. And there were priests whose most of their jobs in South Asia especially was to really understand the movement of the stars, the movement of the planets, and what this could portend in terms of making decisions, in terms of what kind of journey one would take, what kind of life a child would have. And so when one reads ancient texts in the Buddhist and Hindu traditions, the astrologer, who is a high-level, highly educated priest, is someone who is constantly consulted. And it's before making any decisions as to when to make a journey, as to when to perform worship, when to build a temple, when to go to war. One always had to consult the priest who understood the alignment of the planets and the alignment of the stars and the movement of the stars and what this all meant. So there's a tremendous science that went into these understandings and a real belief across all religious traditions that the movement of cosmic bodies, the elements of the universe, as much as they could be known from us here on Earth, really did affect the outcome of what human beings did in this life, in this world. And so incorporated into major works of architecture, there are always, no matter if it's a Jain temple, a Buddhist temple, or a Hindu temple, whether it's in Afghanistan or India or Southeast Asia, if you look, you will almost always find a depiction of the zodiac or of the planets and stars. And very often we don't recognize them. And if you read Western art history books about Indian art, these elements are not even mentioned to speak of very often. But these are some of the earliest and most ancient and most common and prominent figures that one finds incorporated into the other more, what we would consider in the West, kind of pantheon of gods and goddesses and deities that one finds in these temples. In Southeast Asia, we have an example of a painting of all the animals of the zodiac, and this would have been right over the entrance gateway of a Buddhist temple in Sri Lanka. And then we have this fabulous stone example where these are human figures, but they're not so much identifiable iconographically as the great gods of Hinduism, as being part of the mythologies of Hinduism. And so they're very rarely discussed in the art history textbooks as being mainstream, even though they're probably the most common and frequently represented, and also located in these sacred spaces right at the entranceways, at the doorways, leading into the temple, and also usually right at the entrance of the sanctum. And what are these figures? So these are personifications. So they're anthropomorphic depictions of planets and astrological or astronomical phenomena. And they usually come in sets of 9. And these sets of 9 are called Navagraha, the 9 planets or the 9 astrological divinities. And they're each identified, and they're always kind of neatly and tidily lined up, because the implication there is that when these astral bodies are in order and they're lined up correctly according to that time of year, and according to all of the charts, then the outcome of whatever you do will be auspicious and productive. So it's really important to early worshipers, on any kind of activity one embarks upon doing, that one makes sure that the stars and planets are going to be properly in alignment in order to assure the fortuitous outcome of whatever your worship is going to be. So if you go to bring offerings and to perform worship to a deity in a temple for the sake of having a healthy child, don't even bother trying to have a child if the stars are out of line. You have to make sure everything's in alignment, and you have to go and worship at a temple that has this image. Otherwise, it's very possible your worship will not be effective, your devotions will not be effective, because the temple may not have been, there's no proof the temple was consecrated on a day when the astrologers recommended that this is a good day. So when you establish a temple from the very beginning, it's important to consult the astrologers, consult the priests, and consecrate the temple on the correct day. You can build it, but to make it sacred and holy, it has to be the correct day, or else all of the people who come to perform worship there, their worship will not bear fruit. So it's really essential. So these 9 figures all have their particular iconographies. We have examples of the 9 planets from as early as the 1st century, and these, but by the 10th century, the iconography is very clearly codified. The first one is identifiable as the sun. We know this is the sun for several reasons. First of all, he wears boots. You wouldn't think, the sun is very hot, and why do you need to wear boots if you're the sun? Well, this is an interesting kind of early cultural relationship, because the solar deity, the god of the sun in India, was first introduced or early on related to solar worship in Iran under the Zoroastrian system, where there's this solar deity called Mithra. And he, being Iranian and associated with Central Asian Zoroastrians, so Central Asian people who are nomadic people across the steppe, they wore felt boots for horse riding, and because it's to protect themselves from the elements across Central Asia. They had early on converted to Zoroastrianism with their relationships with Iran, and so they worshipped a solar deity named Mithra. So when the Central Asian nomadic groups came into northern India and took over northern India, the solar deities, Surya of India, was conflated with Mithra of the Zoroastrian traditions, and so the sun god always wears felt boots. Another reason we know this is the sun god is he holds these 2 lotus flowers. The full-blown lotus flower is a metaphor for the sun at high noon. So when the sun is at high noon at the top of the dome of the sky, at the vault of the sky, that's a particularly auspicious moment where there's a connection between the earth and heaven. There's a direct connection between your fire and your hearth on earth, as it goes as to a pillar through smoke, straight up through the cosmic hut that is the world, and the oculus that is the full-blown high noon sun that's symbolized by a lotus flower. We see this kind of imagery often even just in halos, like we see in this bronze sculpture at the right, where a nimbus is very often in the shape of a full-blown lotus. The next figure is the moon. The moon holds a rosary and a little pot. It's a vase in which the elixir of immortality that the gods have access to, that is the reason for their being immortal, held down in his lowered left hand. The next figure is Mars, and in India, just as in the West, Mars is considered to be a martial divinity, and he's a warrior type holding a long spear, but he's also pious, so he holds a rosary in his upraised right hand as well. The next figure is Mercury. Mercury holds an arrow. I think the way the movement of the planet Mercury goes quickly across the sky during certain times of year is associated with the arrow. And then the next figure here, who is portly with his big stomach hanging over the edge of his lower garment, is Jupiter, the largest of all the planets. So they knew, as early as the 1st century that Jupiter was the largest planet. And he also holds a vase of water and a rosary of prayer beads. The next is Venus, not considered to be feminine in the Indic tradition, holding again a pot of water and a rosary. The next one is Saturn, another very interesting link with Greco-Roman traditions. Saturn is considered to be a malevolent figure, and so he was cursed by the wife of Shiva, Parvati, for all of his bad behavior. If you have Saturn rising at any time, you should just not even bother starting on any new event or doing anything that you want to have success in accomplishment. You should just stay home. But in order to warn people that malevolent Saturn is coming, he has to carry a staff with a ring of bells that will warn of his coming. He's also, because he was cursed by Parvati, he's lame and he limps. So even though he's malevolent, at least you can hear him coming and he has to come slowly. So that's why he's shown in this kind of awkward sideways posture, because he's lame and limping. The bells to warn of people. They're also found on toddlers. So we have our Saint Sambandar, who wears a girdle of bells around his waist. So toddlers, you need to be warned that they're running off. And then malevolent deities like Saturn, one needs to be warned that they're coming. So this is the use of the wearing of bells for toddlers and malevolent spirits. Now this large, unusual figure is called Rahu. He's the deity that is in charge of eclipses. And he holds in his hands here a crescent moon. Now this figure is related to one of the early primordial myths in the Hindu tradition, from a time when there were only gods and demons in the universe. People had not yet been created. And there was the cosmic ocean, the ocean of milk. And the cosmic ocean had within it the nectar of immortality. And both the demons and the gods wanted it, obviously. They were like cousins. Their mothers were sisters. And so the gods and the demons were vying for this elixir of immortality. And in order to extract it, they had to churn the ocean of milk, like with a butter churn. And so they took a mountain, a primordial mountain called Mount Mandara, and started churning the ocean, and the rope that they used was a great serpent called Vasuki, a multi-headed serpent. The demons, of course, wanted the heads because they thought the tail would be kind of gross, so the gods said, fine, we'll take the tail. They start churning the ocean of milk. The mountain started sinking into the mud at the bottom of the ocean, and so Vishnu generated himself into one of his avatars or incarnations, this time as a tortoise, and he placed himself under Mount Mandara so that it wouldn't sink, so his hard shell held up the bottom of the churning rod. And they continued to churn, and all kinds of wonderful things started coming out of the ocean. There was a goddess, a set of twins, the Gemini twins, called the Ashvins in the Indic tradition. There was the elephant that would be the mount for the king of the gods. And then eventually the serpent kind of belched out this big poison after being used as a churning rod so much. And it was about to cause all of the gods and demons to die until Shiva, one of the gods, was powerful enough to be able to take the poison in and not swallow it and just hold it in his throat. So we have a beautiful painting in the next gallery of a seated Shiva where his throat is painted blue, where that poison sits and has stained his throat. Then finally, after all of that, the elixir of immortality emerges and the demons go to grab it. Vishnu transforms himself into a beautiful woman, distracts the demons, and the gods go to grab the elixir of immortality away from the demons. And as soon as, but then this one, Rahu, gets it back and starts to drink it. And then the sun and the moon warn Vishnu, saying, Rahu is about to drink the elixir, and he starts to drink it. And then Vishnu, one of his weapons is a discus. He flings his discus and slices Rahu across just above the stomach, so the elixir of immortality never actually reaches his stomach and flows out, and the gods catch it. The moon holds it in his pot, and this is why the gods have become immortal. And the crescent, and then to get revenge, Rahu's furious. He's now nothing but a bust, and is furious at the sun and moon for betraying him, and basically, tattletaling on him. And so whenever he catches them, he chases them through the heavens, swallows them for a time. But of course, he has no stomach, so the sun and moon always emerge eventually. So this is the myth surrounding the reason for solar and lunar eclipses. The last deity is in this serpentine form with the tail of a serpent and a three-hooded serpent behind his head. This is the comet Ketu, who comes and goes from time to time. So all of these 9 figures comprise the Navagraha that are found at the entranceways of temples to confirm kind of like a stamp of approval for any worshiper coming to the temple that the proper astrologers were consulted, the temple was consecrated at a correct time. So you can spend a lot of money and a lot of time worshiping the divinity at this temple because your worships will prove to be effective. Thank you.
Thank you.